Good afternoon. With a deadline looming and diplomacy running out of time, the UN Security Council has rejected a resolution that would have permanently lifted sanctions on Iran. This decision, which comes just days before the annual gathering of the world leaders at the General Assembly, will trigger the snapback sanctions at the end of this month if no significant deal is reached beforehand. The vote, with 9 nations against lifting the sanctions and only 4 in favour, includes Iran's allies, Russia and China. And it concludes a 30-day process initiated by Britain, France and Germany. With Tehran describing the outcome as politically motivated, what's left to achieve in this final diplomatic push? And can the UN still reverse course? That will be our discussion today. Welcome to In Depth. Welcome to the programme. The UN Security Council voted Friday to impose sweeping economic sanctions on Iran over its nuclear programme, following calls by Britain, France and Germany. According to Le Monde, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said he had offered a fair and balanced proposal to European powers to prevent the sanctions' return. After voting against extending the sanctions freeze, British Ambassador Barbara Woodward urged Iran to act now. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron predicted the sanctions would be reinstated by the end of the month, though France's UN envoy emphasized that a negotiated solution remains possible. Despite a flurry of diplomatic efforts between the European powers and Tehran, the E3 reported no progress. However, Le Monde noted that the UN Security Council could still approve a new resolution extending the suspension if a last-minute deal is reached. Now, for more on this, we are joined by Sarah El-Kazwini, an Iranian affairs expert, joining us from Tehran, and Mehan Nicola Fursley, who is the director of the EU SEN Centre, joining us from Paris. Welcome to you both. Thanks very much for being here with us. So, Mr. El-Kazwini, starting with you, given the recent diplomatic efforts, how do you view the recent UN vote rejecting the resolution that would have permanently lifted sanctions on Iran? What's your view?
In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, greetings to you and to your audience. It's very strange that during all these years, not Europe or UN General Secretary didn't engage in this agreement in the last month of ending this agreement that was supposed to expire in the upcoming days. We see that they activate the mechanism of snapback against Iran and regaining sanctions on it. This step indicates that whether Europeans or Americans, they want that to remain Iran undermined and prisoner of sanctions and didn't be free of their grasp and their control, and they do whatever they want with it. Unfortunately, now in the time we see the genocide persists in Gaza, killings, destruction persist. We see the UN's General Secretary and the UN Secretary Assembly deals in different way towards this cause. The Security Council should have passed a resolution against Zionism, against occupation. European countries should have passed decisions to impose to Israel to put an end to this genocide, but unfortunately, we see they dealt with Iran that has always been complying to the agreement. They dealt with it in this way.
Well, coming to you, Mr. Fursley, despite a flurry of diplomatic talks, the E3 insisted there was no progress. What do you think the sticking point in these negotiations with Iran is?
It's a very good question, and I think the sticking point is ideological more than anything else. And I think here we have to lay the blame at the doors of both the Iranians and the so-called European troika, because they're both lying to their own public opinion, and they're lying, of course, to the international community, because they both have ulterior motives, right? See, I think the Iranians, of course, are not sincere, blah blah blah. It's true, but what the European troika has done at the UN is equally unsincere. So to make a long story short, it's a ballet. It's like a ballet. Here, unlike what many people believe, I think Trump is not anti-Iranian. Trump is not pro-Iranian. He couldn't care less about Iran. But Trump is kind of moving America very slowly and unseemingly, discreetly away from its previous stance, which was for many years very hostile to the Iranian regime. And Trump is just indifferent, to be honest. He doesn't care, because Trump believes that America should be focusing relentlessly on the race with China and considering Iran's geographic position. America should not be antagonizing them too much because they don't want to see them going into China's embrace, right? That is Trump's view. It is not at all what the Europeans believe, and the Europeans are horrified, basically, by Trump's open overtures to Russia and secret, discreet overtures, mini overtures to Iran. And so what the Europeans are doing here, they're upping the ante, right? Why are they upping the ante? Very briefly, if you remember, before Israel hit the Iranian nuclear plants in Iran, a few weeks before, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is heavily staffed by British, German, Italian, and French bureaucrats. So the International Atomic Energy Agency is not like the UN. It's not really international. It's 70 or 80% of the upper echelons of the agency are from Western Europe, which is a political geographic bias. But anyway, a few weeks before Israel hit Iran, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they published a very tepid, I would say hypocritical report, which was full of small critiques of what Iran was doing in its nuclear power plants, blah, 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 hinting or inferring in a very hypocritical way, the wording was very ambiguous by design, that maybe the Iranians were enriching a little too much, and maybe 55 or 60% was potentially dangerous 20 years down the road. Very weird wording. And of course, the Israelis seized that international atomic energy wording as a pretext to bomb the Iranians, right? With whom I have no sympathy, but I'm trying to be fair here. So to make a long story short, the Europeans today are upping the ante. The position of the European Troika is very ideologically driven. They are neocons. They are admirers and disciples of George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Tony Blair. And they maybe they would like another war in the Gulf, that would please them because that's what neocons do.
Okay, well, yes, I mean, certainly Netanyahu did make the most of that report, didn't he? He started off by saying that perhaps Iran could have a nuclear weapon in a year's time, then it became a few days' time, then it became a few hours' time. So that was very odd. Coming back to you, Mr. El-Kazwini, Mr. Fursley there was saying that both sides are not being honest and not being genuine. What would you say to that? And also Abbas Araghchi has put forward a fair and balanced proposal, he says, to prevent sanctions, the reimposal of sanctions. Given the failure of the vote, what do you think the fate of this Abbas proposal is?
Iran showed great flexibility towards E3 and international community when also they passed the parliament decisions. You know that the Iranian parliament issued a resolution to non-negotiation of the IAEA. Therefore, despite that, Iran overrided this resolution to show its flexibility. It was very flexibility in negotiations, diplomatically and politically with this in this matter. But unfortunately, the other side that closed the door of diplomacy negotiations permanently, which indicates that the other party in of E3 or even the USA, they are heading towards escalation and creating issues and crises and escalating the issues in the region. Iran will not stay silent. Reimposing sanctions means that means that making steps that are in conflict of Iran's interest, and therefore Iran will not be silent. If any country stopped any ships from going to Iran or stopping Iranian ships to sail in any country, this will make Iranians to take steps and measures similarly. And the experience proved in the past that any country interferes with Iran deals similarly with it. With Britain stopped Iranians' ships, also Iran stopped British ships. Same applies to the US. So any country tries to assault Iran and implements sanctions, regained sanctions by Security Council, so Iran will also respond similarly. This means or indicates that the other party wants to push the whole area in crisis and tension, great tension, and maybe this tension will move to military confrontation and war between Iran and any other party. Maybe Iran's call to solve problems through negotiations and dialogues lured the other party and thought that this may be a call of weakness, but it's not. Iran wants to play all diplomatic cards to avoid escalation of confrontation, to wants to gain stability to the region and peace. But when the other party imposes confrontation, therefore it will not stay silent. And we saw during the negotiations between the US and Iran, Israel attacked Iran and waged a war against it, of course, with a great cooperation and coordination with the US. But when Iran responded to this attack with painful strikes to Israel and also attacking Udeid base in Qatar, in the same way it opens the door completely to negotiation and peaceful solution, and playing all dialogue cards in the same time it's ready to confront and proved that it's ready to respond to the attack with critical ones. So I don't know how the other party decided to reimpose sanctions. There is no justification or interpretation of this decision except that they want to push the region to tension. There is no other interpretation for this step, the European step, except that they want to push the whole region to tension, crisis.
Okay, you made that point. I'm going to bring back Mr. Fersney in here. Mr. El-Kuzini, they're saying that there is no reason for the re-implementation of these sanctions, and that Western allies are just trying to bring the region to greater tension. What's your view on that? And also, are the rest of the EU member states in with what France and Germany are doing, along with Britain outside the EU?
I'll start with the second question. I think most European member states are quite indifferent, at least at public opinion level. They couldn't care less. Now, of course, when it comes to governments, it's a different story. So you have what you may want to call the NATOist, or the very pro-NATO governments. And that would be, of course, Germany, France, Britain, and to a lesser extent, Poland, for example. They have that hostile neo-conservative stance, which is very confrontational, anti-Iranian, blah, blah, blah. Now, to the first question, which was about, are the Iranians right to be surprised, right? That was the question, right?
Yeah.
Well, here, I think, I'm at loss for words because, it's been 10 years, since the Obama, joint comprehensive Iran nuclear deal of April, May 2015, right? It's been 10 years. And 10 years is a long time, right? And there was always these snapback, clawback mechanism hanging in the distance. And I think what the Iranians did, quite naively, they believed that 10 years was like an eternity, right? And so they believed very bizarrely that these vaguely worded, snapback, clawback mechanism in the wording of that 2015 deal was there as a verbal decorum. No, they were put in the deal as a poison pill. And the Europeans put them as a poison pill back then, right? So it's only fair that today the same Europeans who insisted with Barack Obama back then to put that little distant future poison pill in the wording, and the Iranians signed the contract without looking at the fine print, right? And now the fine print is slapping them in the face, and they're saying, "Oh my God, it's unfair. Life is unfair." Look. So that's one thing. Another thing, personally, I believe the big mistake that the Iranians did is what happened to them in 2015 was really a big opportunity. So it was a big chance that the Iranians had. They had a lot of money frozen in these bank accounts in New York and London and Frankfurt since the year 1979. So they got back tens of billions of dollars. And what do they do with all the money? And what do they do with the lifting of sanctions in the past 9.5 years? The short answer is the Iranians didn't do much, right? So a lot of that cash was burned by the Iranians to fund these extreme Khomeinist militias far away from Iran. If you look at the map, Lebanon, Yemen, it's far away, right? So they even funded right-wing Armenian Christian militias in Nagorno-Karabakh to fight the Turks and the Azeris. So a lot of money was spent, and Iran was behaving like a big regional power. And now Iran is in trouble, right? Because it lost many of these assets in Yemen and Lebanon, who were massacred by the Israelis. Sadly, the Armenians lost the Nagorno-Karabakh war against the Turks and the Azeris. And of course, by the way, Israel was funding the Azeris and the Turks, and Israel was arming the Azeris and the Turks against the poor Armenians during the Nagorno-Karabakh war. So another dirty war. And what I'm coming at is the Iranians having spent all these billions of dollars every year on this grandeur, the grandiose geopolitical designs. Now they find themselves impoverished and isolated. And, they're scratching their head saying, "Oh my God, what is happening to us?" It's true, the Israelis have been unfair to the Iranians. It's true, the European Troika has been very unfair and hypocritical in its dealing with Iran, yes, but the Iranians themselves, they share half the blame.
Okay, well, let's get the view of Mr. El-Kazmini on that one. So Mr. Fursley says the sunset clause and the snapback in the JCPOA was a poison pill that was put there from the beginning, and now 10 years later, it's coming back to haunt you in Iran, and also that Iran has spent billions of pounds on proxies across the region, acting like an international power, which has left Iran impoverished and isolated. What's your view?
It's undeniable that what your guest said, that some Iranians blaming the previous negotiator, the foreign minister that allowed to involve this mechanism for nuclear agreement. But when it comes to Iranians, allies and friends, we have seen the war and the Israel aggression against Iran. There didn't see that there is no allies interfered in defending Iran, but Iran was the one defending itself and proved they are stronger when that they think. In 1 hour, Israel killed several of leaders, Iranian military leaders, as well as conducting operations, turned off radars and destroying the Iranian defense system, air system. and also attacked Hezbollah and Yemenis, and the Syrian role has ended in the area. And despite all of these losses and painful hits to Iran, but what happened after that? In exchange, what happened is that despite all of these hits, Iran got, but hours after the Israeli attack, an Israeli strike, Iran striked, doubled the strike, which pushed Israel and the US to stop the war and request ceasefire if the other party was able to destroy Iran. And this was their plan. The other party wanted to make the system upside down. All the indicators say that the US and Israel wanted to end the Iranian regime, but what made them stop or request a ceasefire? What happened is that Iran responded to this aggression strongly. This indicates that Iran can respond and defend itself without the need of their friends or allies. And we have seen that Iran, despite of what some may say about Iran's weakness, Iran didn't ask their friends or allies to respond to Israel or the US. Despite that Iran's friends are able to respond to the US, but Iran didn't ask. This is a proof that Iran is able to defend itself and able to confront the aggression strongly without the need to its allies or friends. So this saying that Iran has been weakened and unable and incapable to confront any aggression, these sayings, I think the ground says otherwise.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. El-Qaswini. I'll come to Mr. Fursley now. Despite the UN vote, the door is still open for renewed diplomacy at the upcoming UN General Assembly. What would it take for the EU and the E3, particularly France, Germany, Britain, to reverse course and suspend re-implementation of the sanctions? Or do they have no intention of doing that, regardless of what happens?
I think the time frame is too short. So I think really, and they know it in a way, so even if they had good intentions, and I think they don't, but even assuming that the Brits, the French, and the Germans were positively intentioned and they sincerely wanted the Iranians to make a few concessions and they would reverse course at the UN General Assembly, it's coming in less than 10 days, right? Or in 9 or 10 days. So it's a joke, there's no time in 8, 9, 10 days in that very short framework for the Iranians to make any meaningful concession. And I'm not even sure the Iranians themselves would want to. If they think, the bridges were burned, I think in reality, we're witnessing, like on the surface, it seems that Europe is strong and determined, and look what they did, it only took, the meeting of the British, the French, and the German ambassadors in New York 3 days ago to turn the table in the Arabian Gulf. This is the official narrative. Of course, it's a lie, and they're declining rapidly. So all these Western European countries are declining rapidly because their economies are declining rapidly, to be honest. We live in the age of geoeconomics, which means that before military, UN resolution, international law, ballistic missiles, nuclear plants, there's something which comes numero uno at the top. It's economic and industrial might. And there are only 2 players left, China and America. And Western European countries are becoming increasingly irrelevant. They were unable to defend themselves when they met Trump in Aberdeen 2 months ago, they yielded. So they appear to the world as being weak, inefficient. So if you are Indian, if you are the Indian government, if you are the Iranian government or the Saudi government, you look at what's going on now, and what do you tell yourself? You tell yourself, with whom should I negotiate? Well, I should negotiate with Washington and Beijing because there are only two big superpowers left, right? The others are a joke. So I think the Iranians are not taking very seriously. They're sad, of course.
Okay.
They're sad.
I'm going to have to cut in there, I'm afraid. We're just out of time, but thank you very much indeed. Meher Nicola Fursley, Director of the EU ASEAN Centre, and Salah El-Kazwini, who is an Iranian affairs expert. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. So that concludes this episode of In Depth. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.